All right, open your Bible, please, to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10 this morning. And we are going to look at what the blind man saw. And you probably know this story already very well, but in a moment I'm going to have you stand up with me and we're going to read together. But first of all, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction here. What is happening in Jesus' life at this moment? Jesus is on the road to Jerusalem. He's been telling his disciples for months and months, we're going to Jerusalem. Next time there, they'll arrest me. I'll end up being killed there, dying on the cross, and I will rise from the dead 3 days later. So this is the road to Jerusalem for the last time. This is the journey to the cross with a whole bunch of sad disciples that are probably by this time believing something terrible is going to happen when we get there. And they couldn't be happy about it. No way. But Jesus and his entourage are taking the inland route as they go south from the Galilee area down to Jerusalem. And we know that's the route they took, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. There were other ways to go, but this one was much, much closer than taking the sea route, the Mediterranean Sea route, where you would hike across from the Sea of Galilee or that region, and you go across, I think it's about 20, 25 miles, you would go across to the plains of Sharon, and then you would come down, very easy traveling there on the coastal plain. And then when you got to somewhere around Joppa, you would cut off to the southeast, and you would make your way up into some very, very rugged hills. There'd be some rugged travel up in the north as well. But it was a much longer way, took a whole lot longer, probably adds 50 miles to the journey. The other route would be straight down through the middle, and why in the world would he not take that route if it was just even a little bit closer? Well, it's because that route was filled with hills and mountains, the mountains of Samaria, and there were streams to cross, some small rivers to cross, and it would take a whole lot longer than it would just to go south along the Jordan River Valley plain. And by the way, here's how much time it would take, or at least how many miles. About 85 miles from Capernaum down to Jericho, which would be the turning point where they'd make a hard right turn. And then from there, you've got another 19 to 20 miles to go to get into Jerusalem. And the reason we know that Jesus and his friends took that route is because they went through Jericho. He tells us that. He had a stop in Jericho, and that's the only logical route for them to have taken. So they're going to be in Jericho for a little bit, and Jesus and his friends, you need to know this, on that journey, they're not alone. It's the time of the year when Passover is just about to take place. And then right after the day of Passover, there's a long stretch of, I think, 7 or 8 days, which is the days of unleavened bread. I think it's 8 days altogether, including Passover. And so they're on their way for that Passover in which Jesus will die for the sins of the world. And so they're on a road trip. They're pilgrims on a road trip with Jesus. Actually, you know what it is? It's a hiking tour with Jesus. I can't think of a better guide for a hiking tour. If Jesus is guiding the hiking tour, I'm just going to shut up and let him talk, and I'll take lots and lots of notes. But as they're on the way, I'm sure all kinds of ministry takes place that we don't even know anything about, but I love the highlights that we get. But especially this would be crowded on these roads as they got down to this juncture. They got down to this city of Jericho because there's lots of people of faith, lots of Jews that are coming north from southern Judah along the Dead Sea area. There are some coming across from what we would call Syria today, coming across, or Lebanon, coming across. So they're coming from the north, the south, the east, and the west. And especially as they got within a certain distance, and I'm never sure what that distance is, how many miles out it is, but there would be a circumference drawn around Jericho. And if you live within that circumference, brothers, you have to go to Jerusalem. If you're an adult male Jew, you have to be there for these high holy days. Now, if you're younger, you can stay home. If you're a woman, you can stay home. But if you're of that certain age, you had to go. So as they get closer and closer, all these towns and villages empty out of not just the men typically. They would really look at it as like a family vacation. They would travel with the kids. if they could, and they would all go together. And as they come together in Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, but in Jericho to begin with, you know what it looks like around here? You know any place around here where a bunch of freeways converge? And it just is jammed. You don't want to be in the orange crush at a certain time of the morning or the evening, because it's just going to take you longer than you wanted to get there. And that was their own orange crush. And did I already say this in this service, that highway that led south from Capernaum down to Jericho, it was like their 405. It really was. It was a pretty well-maintained and a very, very busy route. And so they're all coming together at that point. And here's what we assume. I don't have this assumption anymore, well, because I've read the Bible. But I don't have this assumption that they're thinking Jesus is just going to pass through Jericho. What good reason would there be to stop in Jericho? They're just going to pass through Jericho. They're going to make that hard right turn, maybe stop for something to eat, something to drink, refresh themselves, and then just make those last 19 miles up to Jerusalem. But they're not going to stop. They're assuming that they're just passing through, but they are going to stop. And they're going to stop for a reason, because this day Jesus actually had at least 2 appointments in Jericho. And he had to be there at a particular time. Because what he's going to do, well, by the way, what was Jericho known for? What happened in Jericho? The walls came tumbling down. There's some more walls that are going to tumble this day in Jericho, because Jesus has these 2 encounters. There's some broken lives in that town. And so Jesus, who's on the way to die, imagine this. He knows that within a couple of weeks, he's a dead man. A week after he gets to Jerusalem, he's crucified. And so in less than 2 weeks' time, Jesus will die for our sins. But on his way to do that, he takes time to restore at least 3 men in their faith, and probably way more than that. Matthew and Mark and Luke are the only ones that tell us this same story. Only Mark gives us the name of the man that we're going to meet today. Luke gives us another story, another encounter. After Jesus deals with the man we're going to see in our story, he goes a little further into Jericho. And he stops. I'll give it away. Some of you already know who it is. But he stops at a tree. It's a sycamore tree. And he looks up in the sycamore tree. And what's the name of the short guy that's hanging out in the tall tree? Zacchaeus. Wee little man was he, they say. I don't know how wee he was, but he was shorter than most of them. And Jesus had an appointment with him that we won't be covering today. And it won't be just with Zacchaeus, because Jesus will stop at that tree. He'll look up and he'll say, Zacchaeus, get out of your tree. I'm eating dinner at your house tonight. That was the first Zacchaeus knew of Jesus eating dinner at his house. But who did Zacchaeus invite to his house for dinner that night? The other what? Tax collectors. Because those were the only friends he had, because he was a tax collector. And so when I say there were encounters with a bunch of broken men, they were the tax collectors and 2 blind men that day. So let's get to know at least one of these. Let's stand up and turn to Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 46. And follow along with me if you would, and get ready to read out loud at a couple spots. I'll tell you where that is. It says, now they, that's Jesus and his entourage, the men and women that were traveling with him, now they came to Jericho, and as he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, read this part with me, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. That was almost loud enough. Try it one more time. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And then many warned him to be quiet. But he cried out, ready, all the more? 1, 2, 3. And so Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And then they called the blind man, saying to him, be of good cheer, rise, he's calling you. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. And so Jesus answered and said to him, let's read the red letters, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I may receive my sight. And then Jesus said to him, go your way, Your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. Father, what a wonderful story. Thank you that it was recorded for all these generations to hear of the mercy and the power of Jesus and the call of Jesus. So today, Lord, you know what we need. You know what needs to be done in our hearts. And Lord, before this time is over, you're going to hear our voices lifted to you in prayer, telling you what we would really love you to do for us and in us and through us. And so, Father, teach us from your word now in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Have a seat, please. Well, I have to admit it. Turn to that back page in your Bible. You know the one. It's a blank page. Every Bible has one where you keep a list of all the Bible contradictions, don't you? Don't you keep a list of all those multiple Bible contradictions that are in there? And you got to write a new one in there. Because here's the problem. At this point, Matthew and Mark say that Jesus was leaving Jericho. We just read that. But Luke comes along and he says that Jesus was approaching Jericho. It can't be both, can it? Can he be approaching a city and leaving a city at the exact same time? Which one was it? Whichever one it was, the other ones are wrong. They're contradictions. We should close up our Bibles and never trust it again. Come back next week. We're going to be studying Moby Dick or something like that. I don't know. We'll go just some other literature. There's no contradiction here. How many of you have ever been to Israel? Some of you have been with us. Only one time have we stopped long enough in Jericho to take a little tour of old Jericho. You drive through New Jericho, but off to the side of New Jericho, which is the new Jericho, because the Jericho of that day was destroyed in 70 AD, so it got rebuilt again. But there's a bit of space between old Jericho and New Jericho. So Jesus has moved past one Jericho, probably the old ruins, and he's moving into the city where the people live and where the beggars would have been. And you can still see that today. It's possible in Jericho to walk out of Jericho at the same time you're walking towards Jericho. It's just moving from the old one, which is a heap of ruins, to the other one, which was this teeming, vibrant city in Jesus' day. So you can check that one off, but I got another contradiction in just a minute, so we'll keep the list open, okay, for all those contradictions. But the old city was the ruined city, and we all know about all of those walls that came tumbling down there. And Jericho, we know how significant that was in the history of Israel, don't we? That was you could call it their Plymouth Rock. That's where they first stepped foot when they came to the new world, when they came to the new land that God had promised them. And you know the story. March around it 7 times, blow the horn, and the walls will come tumbling down. And they did, but that's the old city. The other one was that rebuilt city. It was built especially by Herod. It had been beautified by Herod, expanded by him. He was an amazing planner and builder. But it was filled with palaces that he built and temples and monuments to Caesar, which was always a smart thing for someone like Herod to do. When Rome came in and took over your nation, one of the smartest things you could do was find a way to say, we're so happy to have you here, if you want to exist for a long time. And so he built many monuments to Caesar. But that city was a vibrant city. There was a lot of natural water from springs that would just bubble up and just refreshing water. There were gardens everywhere and groves of palm trees. They were known for their palm trees. So it really sounds to me like a palm, springs. With the springs and the palms come together. I don't know why it was called Jericho and not Palm Springs, but it was still a beautiful, beautiful city. But today you can still leave one and walk into the other. But this story really is not about 2 Jerichos. Let's leave that part of it behind. The story that's before us today is about 2 Jericonians, if that's a word. I just made it up. I never heard it before. But just 2 guys, 2 blind beggars who lived in and did their begging there on the streets of Jericho. It's about these 2. Wait a minute, Pastor Bill, we just read there's just one. Yeah, but that's in the Gospel of Mark because we have the same issue with the 2 guys. There's another place that this happens too. You might remember when we were talking about Jesus casting the demons out of the guy who lived in the cemetery, lived in the tombs, and he was running around naked, and he had chains that he had broken and all that. Other gospel writers tell us there were two of them. But only one of them gets anything close to a name, and in that story, he's called Legion. And that's the demon talking in him, saying, "You don't mess with us. There's a pack of us in here. There's Legion, hundreds of us in here." I don't know what his real name was, but I doubt that he went by Legion for very long. But there were other gospel writers who said there were two of them. And so there were two, but just one gets the highlight, and the same thing here. So again, there's no contradiction. Mark just gives us the name of one of the blind men. And we know his father's name because his father's name is in his name. His name literally is Bar, which means son, Timaeus, the son of Timaeus. So his daddy was Timaeus, and he got his daddy's name. But in verse 46, there's a man who's sitting there beside the road. And we'll kind of focus on just this one. I'll go back and mention the other one, although we don't know his name. But there's this man sitting beside the road as a blind beggar who's got terrible eyes, but boy, he's got great ears. He hears things that you would never hear. And isn't that the way it is when one of your senses begin to diminish, the other senses that keep you in touch with the world around you, it's heightened. And you can hear things, if your eyes are gone, you can hear things that nobody else can hear. So let's see what this blind man and his friend sitting beside the road saw. Let's sit and kind of imagine what they must have heard that day. And I have a hunch on what they must have heard. There would have been crowds that were passing by, and I've told you why. It was the Passover that was about to happen. And all these travelers are moving in from all these different regions. They're converging there in Jericho. And maybe it's the last refreshment stop to stock up on some dates or to stock up on some grapefruit juice or something that you're going to need. Refresh yourself and get ready for the 20-mile hike up into Jerusalem. And so the crowds are just gathering there. And these guys sitting beside the road that day would have heard all of that noise. It just everybody passing by all day long. And by the way, there were many, many beggars in those days, and especially in those regions. And you'd always see them where you see any beggars, where people are, where there's a bunch of people. And they got their tin cup or their sign to say, "Hey, I need help, mercy, anybody, just a little bit, God bless you, please help if you can." And they would sit there. And there were many beggars in those days because Rome had done what nations do when they take over. They don't even have to take over. You can have just a change of administration and things will change. And what typically happens is taxes either go up or taxes go down. And when the Romans came, guess which way the taxes went? Through the roof. I've read historians that say it is most likely that the tax burden on the typical hardworking person in that region of the world, fisherman, farmer, whatever they were, 60 to 70% went to the government before you had anything to put on your own table or the money to buy salt for your own table. And so I think that's probably literally where they were at that point. Rome had raised taxes and created an unlivable economy for most of the people of that land. And so everybody's moving. They're trying to find some place where they can survive. A lot of them we know moved to Tennessee. They went off to Tennessee, some went up to Montana, as far away as Idaho, and they're not moving to Australia right now, but they were scattering everywhere. Lots of poor people. Listen to this. Lots of poor people for Jesus to do what he said he'd come to do. Do you remember it on the day that he inaugurated his ministry? And he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, and he has anointed me," say it with me if you know it, "to preach the gospel to the poor." The poor. There's not a lot of people that focus on the poor. There's not a lot of people, maybe not even a lot of churches, I don't know, that make room in what they do to help the poor among them and to pass out food and to do what they can to help people get by. But Jesus said, "My focus is on the poor." And there were so many poor people that would walk with him and were drawn to him. But these two formed a fellowship. These two men, these blind beggars, formed a little sort of a fellowship of the unfortunate right there along the streets of Jericho. Both of them blind, and both of them became beggars. Of course, there was little more for the blind to do in that culture. If you were blind, unless you had a family that would support you, you were a beggar. You were out on the street. Find yourself a corner. Buy yourself a tin cup. Find one in the trash and make that your means of support for yourself. And so there they sat with little else to do for the blind in those days except to beg. There were no bread lines and government housing to be passed out. You had to find some way to live and somewhere to sleep. And so there sits Bartimaeus. Can we just call him Bart? It's just a smaller name. Bart and his buddy. And some people would drop a coin or two into their cup, I'm sure, especially on days when the religious people were heading for Jerusalem, those who had a heart for mercy. But most of them didn't, because it was hard for everybody in those days. But they didn't sit in silence. There was a lot to be heard. And I am convinced that because of the time of the year that it was, and this would happen several times of the year with the travelers, there was music in the air as they traveled. And people would sing songs as they were going up and down those highways. And it was a way to pass the time. And by the way, how many of you, when you drive long distances, like half a mile, okay? I need to have music. Anybody else like music on when you're driving? And I'll flip around to different stations. I'll listen to some news radio. You could call it most of that hate radio, but I listen to some news radio too on both sides. But I love listening to music. How many of you don't like to listen to music when you drive? We'll still love you. We just might not understand you. But I love listening to music. Well, they didn't have, obviously, recorded music, but they would sing as they went. And I have a strong suspicion, I never put this together until just over the last several days, that I think I know the songs that they would have been singing as they made their way to Jerusalem, where they would sing these songs in the temple on these holy days. There was a pack of 15 psalms that are called the Songs of Ascents, and they're Psalm 120 through 134. And here's just a couple of snippets that I think would have made sense to them as they went down the road. In Psalm 120, the psalm that starts all of this sort of playlist, this wonderful playlist in the Scripture, the song like, "In my distress I cried to the Lord and He heard me." Now, you've never heard that tune before because I just made it up, but you might recognize this tune. And if I sing a tune you remember from these little snippets on these songs, sing it along with me. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, maker of heaven, creator of the earth. And that's a song that would have been a perfect traveling song. As you step outside your door and you begin your journey and you see those same old rugged mountains. And you're not saying, oh, those mountains are so beautiful. You're saying, those mountains are so difficult. God, who's going to help me over the mountains? And he says, God will help you. The next one, Psalm 122. I love this one. You're thinking about where you're going. You're on the way to the house of the Lord. And I was glad, very glad, when they said unto me, the Lord today. There is singing, there is dancing, there is victory in the house of the Lord today. And that would move you forward. I know where we're going. It's going to be great when we get there. Psalm 125. Those who trust in the Lord shall be as Mount Zion, which cannot be removed. You're going to an immovable mountain to celebrate what God has done. 128, blessed is the one who fears the Lord, the one who walks in his way, as you're literally walking. These last two, Psalm 133. I love this one. It's a very brief one. Let's sing this part. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together. And everybody said what? Amen. I love it when the kids get along, when the brothers and sisters dwell together. But the last one, you're there and everybody's assembled and you've sung through all of these songs of progress, which is what songs of ascents means, mountains that every believer has to climb. And this last song, it's the pinnacle of it all, and it just says this. Now that we're here, it's this. Come bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the house of the Lord, and lift up your hands in the holy place, and bless the Lord. Come bless the Lord. It's like singing, let's do what we were created to do. Let's bless the Lord together in this place of unity. But when Bartimaeus hears all this singing, there's something that happened that must have sounded very different to him. Something changed. And he hears something that it's just different. It's more than the road noise. Maybe the singing of the people or the families and friends that are traveling together. It's more than the sounds of the sacrificial animals, because as you would travel, you'd bring the bird that you were going to sacrifice if you were poor. And there must have been a lot of birds sacrificed in those days because of all the poor people. But you'd bring along a lamb, or you'd bring along a goat, or something that you would be willing to sacrifice to God. It was more than the noise of that, or the noise or the sounds of the beasts of burden, the donkeys, and the camels that are carrying all of your luggage for you. And I wonder if it was just this mass of people that were rushing to get to Jesus as they saw him coming. Something changed for Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, to wonder, what is that? Now we look in our Bibles at verse 47, and it says, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and yell, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. But my question is, how did he know that it was Jesus? How would he know? He'd never seen Jesus. He might hear something different in the crowd. Well, I know how he knew. Mark doesn't tell us, but Luke tells us. He says this, and then it happened, as he, Jesus, was coming near Jericho, that a certain blind man sat by the road begging. And that was Bartimaeus. And hearing a multitude passing by, he asked, he said, what is all this? What's all this mean? He asked what all this noise meant. And they told him, that's Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And that's all he needed to hear. For him, that changed everything for him. Because it was Jesus. Everybody had heard of Jesus. He had heard of Jesus. Zacchaeus had heard of Jesus. But Bartimaeus, he'd heard all the stories. It was told to us on our way through Mark that nobody could keep this quiet. And everything Jesus had said, everything he had done, especially the magnificent stories of healings and the incredible sermons that he preached, the news of those sermons and the news of those miracles, they traveled everywhere. Everyone had heard, from Lebanon to Syria to Judea, all up and down Israel, all throughout Samaria. They'd heard what Jesus had said. They knew about his popularity. And I can just imagine that when Bartimaeus one day heard somebody tell him, this Jesus, this preacher from up in Galilee, you know what he's saying? He's saying, blessed are the poor, for they get a kingdom. Blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. You don't think those little droplets of truth would have had Velcro for their hearts? That he's got room for poor people? This is that Jesus? He would have heard about the messages, the sermons that Jesus preached. He would have heard about what Jesus did. He would have heard of his power and his mercy. For who? Well, maniacs who were running around naked in cemeteries. Had put their minds together, and lepers that nobody would touch. He purposely threw his arms around them and brought them back to health. And prostitutes that had been abused and used all their life in human traffic. This is nothing new. He would reach out and touch them and put them in their right mind and bring healing and hope to them. And some of them would join his traveling troops, different women at that time. He would have heard about the healing of the deaf and the blind, and the dead. But when that day, whenever that story got to him, Bartimaeus, maybe it was his buddy, his nameless, anonymous buddy, sitting there beside the road one day, and they're sitting there jingling their tin cup, and one guy says to Bartimaeus, you know what I heard the other day? What? What'd you hear? Bartimaeus, I heard about Jesus. Oh yeah, I've been hearing about Jesus. But I heard he healed the blind. And he said, he what? He did what? And maybe hope rose in his heart that day, but now to find out that Jesus is the guy on the road, this was the moment of change for this brother. And he decided, I've got to get to him. And he did get to him, but he knew that this was his only chance. And so he began to, as we read there, look at it again, he began to cry out and say or yell, Jesus, son of David, have some mercy right here, mercy on me. I want you to see the word there in the Greek that's behind the word cried out. And I know there's times where you and I need to do this, not just read that they did it, but we need to do this ourselves. Look at this. He began to cry out. The word cry out is the word kradzo. Say that with me. Kradzo. What's it sound like? What's it sound like? Kradzo, kradzo. Cray, cray, cray. Crazy. That's really literally what it means. He went crazy. He went, I love the word vociferate. That actually was in one of the descriptions. I didn't know what vociferate meant. It means to shout, not shut, but shout loudly and to clamor. He went wild with a loud voice, screaming and shrieking. That's literally how it's translated in other places in the Bible. He had to get Jesus' attention. He starts to go a little crazy. And you see that in other places. And maybe you've done that as you cried out for help because you were just as desperate as him. So he cries out, Jesus, Messiah. That's what Son of David means. He's the only one in the Gospel of Mark who has the guts to cry out, that's the Messiah. Nobody else calls him Son of David except this man. The only other time you see it is Jesus using the term for himself in the Gospel of Mark. And so he goes wild with this hope that maybe this is it. I've got to get to him. Well, verse 48 takes us a step further. Look at that. The believing mob that are around Jesus, they're so helpful at this point, so incredibly helpful. So then many warned him to be quiet. And he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So what are they saying to the man? You're in the entourage with Jesus. And you're walking through Jericho and you're hoping that you're just kind of passing through. And here's a guy over here and he's crying out, Jesus, Son of David. And what are they saying to him? Shut up. They tell him, quiet down, shut up. Maybe be a little more dignified. You call him the Messiah, then show him a little bit more respect. But pipe down, lower your voice a little bit. So they tell him to, and there's a lot of scholars that believe that the apostles and the disciples were a part of this. They certainly did nothing to stop the verbal abuse toward the man himself. And I can see them telling him, hey, dude, come on, shh, quiet down. And so he cries out, and many warned him. Ooh, they warned him. Oh, there was a warning. If you don't shut up, we'll what? We'll shut you up or something. But they had intention, maybe just a threat. They warned him to be quiet. And then it just made him yell even louder. And so, it gets good right here. But here, before we go to verse 49, I want to make a confession. I wonder how many times I have been guilty of creating a barrier where a bridge was needed, where you have an opportunity and there's some desperate person and you don't even take a step. I shouldn't say you. I don't even take a step towards them. Well, because I'm busy. I'm a religious guy. I got religious duties, I got a religious schedule. I got important things to do. And there's somebody, and there's not even a step towards them, or even an acknowledgement of a human being there beside the road. And I wonder how many times it's been my attitude that built a barrier, where a person already felt a barrier. And maybe even, just an obvious disapproval. You see somebody, oh gosh. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Maybe it's a condition. And maybe you've just seen so many needy people that you can't help. It's just like, it's overwhelming. I want to tell you something. I live in the same city that you do. And I drive through, the same streets that you do. And we see an increasing number of desperate people along the road, don't we? I mean, everywhere we go. And no, I don't have all the resources to help everybody, and neither do you. But as we're driving, and I catch myself going, oh gosh, I hear my wife, Joy, begin to pray for them. I hear a very different expression coming from my bride's heart. It's more like, oh, a groan of mercy. And a recognition as she prays for him, that's somebody's daughter. That was somebody's little boy there. And she builds a bridge in prayer to touch that heart while her spiritual husband is letting more of a barrier be built, at least in my own heart. And I find myself more and more saying, God, teach me your ways. Teach me your love. Teach me to build a bridge and not a barrier for people. And so there sits Bartimaeus with all of these religious people on their way to do their singing in Jerusalem, busy, can't wait to get to the beautiful city up on the hill. And there's Bartimaeus sitting on his own with, well, nobody except his buddy, and in their need and this sad life that they've not brought upon themselves, just blindness did it to them, and nobody advocating for them. Nobody's advocating for Bartimaeus that day. No disciple, no apostle, not even, by the way, Peter or Mary Magdalene or the other women that traveled with him. You don't see any of them going and saying, Jesus, hey, Jesus, I know we got to get to Jerusalem, but can you help that guy and his buddy beside the road? Not a one of them did it. Nobody did. I'm not saying that to comfort myself. It's just the truth that nobody that day did until Bartimaeus raises his voice even louder, shouting at Jesus and saying, Jesus, Son of David, Messiah, could I get some mercy here? And look at the verse, 49. And so Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And then they called the blind man, saying to him, be of good cheer, rise, he's calling you. And I don't know, is it the inference there that finally the apostles are ready to partner with Jesus on reaching this man? But these guys who've done nothing at this point, whoever it was that responded, they've done nothing to help the man up to that point until Jesus stops and he turns and he looks at the man. To whom other people are saying, dude, just shut up, come on, pipe down. And Jesus says, bring him to me. And maybe one of the apostles who was about to say, oh, yes, right away, Jesus. I was just about to do that anyway. I was about to bring him to you. I'd be happy to help Bartimaeus come to you. But suddenly they're saying, cheer up, brother. He's asking for you. He wants you. Can you imagine what that did to the heart of this man? We won't have to imagine because we see it right there. But again, Jesus turns the tide. And he says, bring him to me. I haven't said this in any other service, but I wonder if that's maybe what Jesus is saying to us these days. When we see somebody, and he might be saying, bring that person to me. Well, how? Begin with prayer. Then maybe take it to a greeting. Maybe take it further. Maybe fill up his cup. Maybe help him with the resources you have. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but Jesus will tell you what to do. He'll tug on your heart, and I know you'll be obedient. My heart is to say yes to everything Jesus wants me to do. Your heart too? So just do whatever he puts before you to do. But they did it. They bring him to him. They tell the blind man, hey, come on, cheer up. He's calling for you. And then he gets to Jesus. This is crazy. I love this. This is kradzo. I love this. Verse 50. And throwing aside his garment, he rose and came to Jesus. Throwing aside his garment. Why would he throw his garment away? And if it's a blanket that he's wrapped up in, just take it off your shoulders, let it fall to the ground, and walk on over to Jesus. Why would he throw it aside? I was out on the courtyard today after the last service, and Debbie Stoner came over to me. She said, I heard something about that cloak that he was wearing. There are some writers that said he was dressed in what every beggar would be dressed in. It was a beggar's cloak, and it has certain characteristics of it. And that makes every bit of sense that he said, I'm not going to need this anymore. And so he throws it away, and he stands up, he rises up, and he makes his way to Jesus. Now, I don't know. Oh, I certainly hope, don't you? I certainly hope that the guys that were telling him to shut up are saying, can we help you get there now? Here, we'll take you to him. You don't have to grope your way through your darkness to get to him. We'll help you get there. I'm really hoping that that's a scene we get to see, whether we see it on The Chosen or we get to see it when we get to heaven. I'm hoping that's the way that it actually happened. But in verse 51, he rises up, throws his garment aside, and he came to Jesus. And so Jesus answered and said to him, what do you want me to do for you? Jesus, you're smart. You know everything. Isn't it obvious what the guy needs? Yeah, but Jesus didn't ask because he needed to know. He asked because Bartimaeus needed to ask. He needed to identify it. I don't know why God does it that way. But Jesus said, if you'll ask anything in my name, and there's conditions on that, things that will glorify him and benefit you. But he said, if you'll ask, not just if you'll sit still, I'll bring it to you. But if you'll ask, I'll do it. And so he coaxes the man to ask. And so he says it. He says, what do you want me to do for you? Isn't that a vaguely familiar question? Didn't we read that just recently? Look back a half a page at verse 35. Here's James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They came to him and they said, teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. That's bold. Come on. How many of you have ever had a child come to you and say, Mommy, Daddy, I want to ask you if I ask you for something, will you give it to me? And before they identify what it is? Yeah, come on, you've had that happen. I want you to do something for me. Well, honey, what is it? But I need to know that you'll do it before I ask, because they know that's probably not going to happen. And every wise parent wants to know what it is that you want before I guarantee that you're going to get it. And so, but these are grown men, and they say, hey, if we ask you for something, will you give it to us? He said, well, what is it? What do you want me to do for you, Jesus said. Same question that was asked here. Now, what they asked for, it's just a little thing. They said, we just want to know that we'll get to sit on your right hand and on your left when you're in your kingdom in heaven. In other words, they're saying, we want to be the two most important people in heaven when we get to heaven. And Jesus says, no, I can't give that to you. The seating arrangement in heaven is already determined by the Father. And so he said, no, you don't get that. But just at the end of the same story, the same chapter, here Jesus is saying again, what do you want me to do for you? Please listen to me on this. You need to know that Jesus asks you that same question every day. What do you want me to do for you? And no, he's not going to give me the result of some silly thing. I want $1 million. That's one or two. Your choice, Jesus. 1 or 2 million. That's all I want. I almost bought a book yesterday. It was the title of it was how to start with $1 million. No. It was how to start with 100 and get to $1 million. I can start with $1 million and get to 100 really, really easy. But how to start with 100 and get to $1 million. And I looked at it, I flipped through it. It was just another bunch of, I don't know, maybe it's a plan for somebody. But the question is, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, now this is significant. He said, Rabboni. That's my teacher. How had he been his teacher? How had Jesus possibly been this man's teacher? Well, I've already talked about it. From the teaching that was spreading all over the place, that Jesus had put into the mission of his men. What they'd heard from the little snippets that came from his sermons. He said, you've been teaching me, Jesus, already. You're my teacher. Rabboni. He said, all I want is I want to receive my sight. I want to receive my sight. I want to see again. We go quickly to verse 52. And Jesus said to him, well, go your way. I don't have time for you. Oh, my goodness, no. He says, go your way. He said, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight, and he followed Jesus on the road. It's so powerful. What an amazing wrap up there. Jesus said, you've got what you asked for, and now you can go your way. And you know what? He had no intention of going his way. No intention. His way didn't work. His way, all he'd known for maybe all of his life, it was over. What did he do? He went Jesus' way from that point on. He didn't just come for the healing. He came for the life. He made a surrender of his life to Jesus. And there's a lot of people that Jesus helped during his ministry. There's a lot of people that have been blessed by God. The Bible says he causes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust. He lets his sun shine upon the evil and the good. And there's a lot of evil people that have stayed in their evil, stayed in their sin, beneficiaries of the goodness of God. But this man said, I don't just want my healing. I've changed my mind. I want you. And he walked on with Jesus. And I think the reason he's the only one whose name we know is because he probably was the one that kept following Jesus. He followed him down the road. And maybe that next day, he's in the entourage that goes with them into Jerusalem and will be there when Jesus' life is sacrificed for him. But do you see what the blind man saw that day? You see the hope that he saw? He came with this hope and with this expectancy that if he could get to Jesus, things would be different. You see what he saw? The hope of a new life. Throwing off that old life along with the cloak that came with it. And I wonder, are we as desperate to see God move in our day and in our lives as he was? I see that man running forward, if he could, on his own, maybe with the help of the disciples, with this desperation, but now this brand new hope that things are changing for me. And I even see wild kradzo joy in him. I think he's smiling. I think his heart has to be bursting in his chest as he moves towards Jesus, and everything is settled. And I love what I see here. And I wonder, are we desperate enough to throw everything that we are into the hands of Jesus? Are we desperate enough to pray? And sometimes pray louder than we typically pray at a whisper. There's times when I have to raise my voice. I don't usually do that here, but a lot of times when I'm alone and a lot of times when I'm in my car, I raise my voice in prayer a lot of times. And desperate enough, are we desperate enough to identify the need to God with all the details? Maybe it's our health or our family or our church, our future. And telling God, I trust you, I trust you, I trust you with my future. You've never let me down. All my life you've been faithful. Are we tired of all those self-help options? I'll tell you, there's another half a dozen self-help, perfect life books that are coming your way, and there'll be 3, 5, 7, 12, 25, or 57 steps, and your life will be together. Are we tired of all those options? Every bestseller book promising the answer and the cure in however many steps. Or 40 days left to your perfect you, and you can be transformed. But have we brought our life? Just our life and our hopes and our blindness and our desperation and our hopeless situation to Jesus yet? Have we done that? Do you see what the blind man saw? But I want you to see this too. I wonder if you see what Jesus saw that day. What he saw when he saw those two guys by the side of the road, he saw his mission for that day, that moment. These two blind friends. And Jesus did only what he saw the Father doing. He's told us that already. He said, I get up every day, and all I do is what I see the Father doing. All I say is what I hear the Father saying. And he knew those assignments were on his calendar. I kind of believe from the beginning of the day when he would get up and spend time with the Father. And so when he hears the cry, he said, oh, that's it. That's the one for right now. And he goes down the road. Oh, that's the dude that I saw in my prayer time up in the tree. And so there it is. And he walks right into those. And he's ready to serve Jesus in an amazing way. So today, do you see what Jesus sees? I want to close with this. I want to make it very personal for you. Do you see what Jesus sees when you look in the mirror at you? Do you see him? Do you see yourself the same way that he sees you? When he sees you, he sees his mission for today as well. He's not limited by his physicality any longer. Do you see what he wants to do in you today? Do you see the person looking back at you in the mirror is one of his loved ones? You are so deeply and perfectly loved by God today. I couldn't even describe how much he loves you. Do you know that he sees you in your desperation? And some of you, it's literal. I'm not just throwing out meaningless words. Some of you know you're in a desperate place right now. And you need to know he sees you in that desperation. And he calls to you. And he says to you, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do? And nobody can say that to him but you. Lord, I want my mind back. I want my sanity back. I want hope back. I want my health back. And you say it to him, you describe it to him. He sees you in that desperation and he calls to you. He sees the pain of your past and he sees your hope for forgiveness. And he sees the desperation of your lost children and friends who have wandered away from Jesus. And he cares about them as much as you do. So right now, right here, what do you want Jesus to do for you? Be as desperate as Bartimaeus was as you approach Jesus. Stand as confidently as he did as he stood before that blind man. and offering him that hope. And be as responsive with that same hope and wild joy as you respond to his call, saying, come to me. You are just as loved as the son of Timaeus ever was. You are just as welcome. And he's calling you to come to him right now. So believe what Bartimaeus believed. And I know what Bartimaeus believed. He believed it, by the way, even before Paul preached it. Paul's sitting in a prison in Philippi. And while he's sitting there, he's singing with his buddy, and the prison begins to shake. And doors are flying open, and rocks are probably falling, and he sees through the dim light, he sees a man who's about to take his life, the prison guard. He knows if I lose my prisoners, I lose my life. So he decides to commit suicide and take his own life. And Paul says, don't do that to yourself, bro. Don't do that. We're all here. And the guy comes in, and he's stunned. He says, I want what you have. And he says to him, what must I do to be saved? And Paul gives him the simplest answer. Why so? Doesn't it take a lot longer than this to preach the gospel to somebody? Not while the prison's shaking, it doesn't. But he says, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you shall be saved. And that man got saved that day. Many years later, Paul would write that down in the book of Romans, and he says, whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. From whatever. What's trying to destroy you now? Bring that to Jesus. And we're going to do that right now, just like Paul did. We're going to express it. And by the way, you know you know when Paul discovered that? Call on the name of the Lord and you shall be saved. When he was a blind man, sitting beside the road, when Jesus had stopped him in his evil tracks, and he said, oh, Jesus, help me. However he said it, he called on the name of the Lord that day, and that man got saved. And maybe that's you today. You need to bring your lost life to Jesus and know that he set up this moment for you right this moment, right now. There's nothing and no one could keep that blind Bartimaeus back from getting to Jesus as he was going crazy. He said, gotta get to Jesus. Why would you let anything stop you today? Now's your moment. So I'm going to ask you right now, just to take a moment. I'm going to turn my mic off, and the guys are going to play. We're going to sing in just a moment. But I'm just going to give you a moment to bring what you need to bring to Jesus. Imagine, now this is quite a stretch of the imagination. Imagine I'm Jesus. And I say to you, what do you want me to do for you today? What would your answer be? Let's go ahead and take a moment of prayer while you lift that up to Jesus right now, and I will too.
This has been a presentation of Refuge Calvary Chapel, Huntington Beach. For more information about our ministry, please visit refugefamily.com or call 714-891-9495.
Set free.